And we're live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And today we don't typically have a podcast coming out. We actually thought we were on an off day because we don't have any Revved Up recaps, no mothership podcast. But today at 3 o'clock Eastern time was the trade deadline. And we saw Troy Weaver make a last-minute heave from half court. We don't quite know if it's a bucket yet. We don't know if it's a game winner. He might have airballed it. I don't know. But we made a trade. We gave up Saddiq Bey to the Atlanta Hawks to get James Wiseman from the Golden State Warriors, and we gave up Kevin Knox also to the Golden State Warriors. What are some of your first takeaways from this trade, Ryan?
Well, as my dad would say, it was a terrible trade. I would beg to differ. I wouldn't say it was a terrible trade. I love Saddiq Bey. Don't get me wrong. He was one of my favorite Pistons by far. Now one of my favorite Hawks. But there's multiple ways of looking at this. I took the approach of looking at it if I were a GM, or what would I think of if I was in Weaver's shoes. And immediately what I thought of is just our overall center position. Because in our recap recently, I talked about how we need better depth there because we don't really have depth outside of Stu and Duran because Noel doesn't play. Bagley's injured. So we needed depth there. And I guess I called it in a sense that it happened. But I will say this is more of like Weaver going, like, let's think about this for a second in the sense that Wemby is not guaranteed for us. We are one of the worst teams in the NBA, if not the worst. But that doesn't mean that we're locked up for the first overall pick. Because let's say we get the second overall pick, which is more likely to happen than getting the first, because we really rarely get the first overall pick. It's really only happened once with Cade and everybody. But if we don't get number one, Wemby's going number one no matter what. So this is my way of saying, like, just think in the sense that maybe this is Weaver going, well, Wemby's not guaranteed. If we do land him, cool, I can move one of these guys, as in James Wiseman or Nerlens Noel, as an example. But if he doesn't get Wemby and no team's going to want to trade for him kind of thing, think about it in the sense of, well, Wiseman is still 21 years old. Granted, he's played 60 games in his career with the Warriors in just 3 seasons, which is awful. So he hasn't played a full season yet, but he's also gotten injured. They've been trying to develop him. The Warriors are just not a very good developmental team. They know how to take good players late, but they don't know how to develop. Because, yeah, you could say they developed Curry, and yeah, you could say they developed Clay and Jordan Poole and all these guys, but really they didn't develop them. They just saw something in these guys that nobody else saw and got a nugget of gold from it. So I see this move from Weaver as in he's shoring up the center position, making sure we have depth there. We need depth, and Wiseman is a great defender. And then you add in the fact that Bey has not produced to the level that everybody thought he would so far this year. And just in the sense of, okay, I keep saying that a lot. I'm trying to explain myself, but where I'm going with this is just think in the sense of having a top overall pick to take a wing to replace Bey, and a guy like, if I'm saying his name right, Brandon Miller from Alabama, one of the best wings in college basketball right now, can do pretty much just as much, if not more than Bey already. And he's a freshman in college, and he's bigger. So I think adding him in and then having Wiseman in to fill the void at center for depth, I think that in the long run, if this pans out, it's going to be one of the best moves for us.
Yeah, I see a lot of talk about how Wiseman is cheaper than a Saddiq Bey re-up. I heard a lot of talk about how Saddiq Bey after this season might be asking for a 4-year, 85, 80 million type of contract. And I just don't know if Saddiq is worth that at this point. So I kind of see where that's coming from. And like you were saying, this draft coming up is a very small forward heavy draft. So I think what this is more about is if we're for sure about Isaiah Stewart, because Isaiah Stewart's kind of proving to be a little bit of a what if at the starting center position and at power forward. And I think Jalen Duren is proving that he can be consistent. And I think that with this trade, Marvin Bagley, Nerlens Noel are for sure not long term now. You just can't have 4 or 5 centers on a roster. And if we do say we do get Wemby, then we have 6. That's just not going to happen. So I can see possibly Wiseman not mixing well with the team and then him getting flipped during the season. There's nothing saying that he has to be long term. But with this trade happening, I definitely see Bagley and Noel getting flipped in the season. But what do you kind of see with the Isaiah Stewart? Do you see that Weaver kind of getting a little bit eerie about, okay, what is the future with Stu here?
I don't think he's questioning it. I think he's seeing this as an opportunity to create something special in the sense of develop Stu as much as you can, add a 3-point shot to his game, make him the most dynamic player on the court, like he should be. And I've always said this. I feel like he's going to come off the bench and be a key role player off the bench in the future for us. He's not going to be a starter. He's
Right.
good enough to start on a bunch of teams. He's good enough to start for us now. But going forward, when you have Bogdanovich and all these other guys too to give minutes to, I see Stu coming off the bench and being like a Draymond-esque kind of player off the bench. Because adding the 3-point shot to his game, I see Stu as a Draymond Green because Stu
Right.
can do almost just as much as Draymond Green can do right now. So I see this as modernizing Stu to becoming Draymond Green. So I don't think this is like Weaver going, oh, I'm questioning Stu very much right now. Because if he was questioning him as much as we think, wouldn't you have thought that Stu would have been moved at the deadline for something?
Right.
So I just think that this is more of like let's weaponize Stu more than anything. And then the more Marvin Bagley point though, I will say I don't necessarily see Bagley getting flipped as quick as youth might think. I
Mm-hmm.
think he's gonna be one of the key role bench players going forward with this trade. I think Noel potentially is gonna get bought out or is not even gonna suit up for another game this season.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see Noel staying. Bagley, I do see him staying because he wants to play in Detroit. And he wanted to play in Detroit even with the Pistons getting Duren in the draft, and even with still having Stu and adding Nerlens Noel. He signed a extension for a reason. Like he wants to be in Detroit. So from that knowledge, you would assume, like what I am saying with Stu here and weaponizing him, weaponizing Bagley, making sure you can get the most out of him coming off the bench. Because imagine having a guy like him who can put the ball on the floor, who can do all these things that
Mm-hmm.
most players in the league can't do. Because there's a reason why he got drafted as high as he did. But he just hasn't unlocked that ability yet. And if you can unlock that ability and stay consistent, having guys like Stu and Bagley coming off the bench for a young Pistons team would be very beneficial.
Yeah, one of the things that I am a little bit eerie about, and you kind of mentioned it, and it's something that's very questionable with James Wiseman, is being very injury prone. Like you said, in 3 seasons, has only played 60 games in his career, not even a full 82 schedule. So, we're giving up a guy like Saddiq Bey that is an absolute bruiser that never, it, he's sat out very few games, if ever. And then we're trading him for a guy that is typically day to day every week. We saw him completely miss the month of January. His most recent outing, he had 5 minutes, but with 6 points. So, I mean, 5 minutes looks pretty productive right there. 100% shooting. He had 17 points against the Denver Nuggets and finished with 9 points on 3 of 4 shooting and a total of 2 rebounds. Against the Utah Jazz in December 28th, he had 4 rebounds and 4 points. So James is kind of a guy that hasn't really been given the opportunity yet to actually be able to show his versatility and give him longevity as far as minutes in a game. I'm so excited to see the Pistons hopefully give him enough of the starter minutes that he needs to show his skill, because we saw that with Killian Hayes, right? For his first 2 seasons, we saw him not get a whole season together, not get long minutes and have 30 minutes in a 42-minute game. And we were very discouraged as a fan base because he couldn't finish that off. But then this season, he's found consistency, and we've seen him go through cold and hot streaks. But mainly this season, he has really kept it together very well. So I'm hoping James Wiseman, with a fresh look, a new coaching staff, new younger teammates that he might get along with more, and hopefully have a little bit more of a chemistry with, hopefully that is a recipe for success for him, because the payoff with this trade is insurmountable. You can't even put a number on how, if this does succeed, how great Wiseman will be. He's got all the tangible. He passes the eye test. I'm so excited to see how he gets along with this team. And I know Cade and James are going to get so well. They get along together so well. They have the same temperament. And I think that Wiseman will just have way more in common with these guys than he did with the Golden State Warriors. That's a team full of older vets that are great for teaching the way, but not necessarily building chemistry with a young center. So it does worry me knowing that we got rid of a Saddiq Bey who is known for staying healthy, for a guy that's known for being injured a lot. But the payoff, I think, is just that much higher with James.
Yeah, a lot of people would go and worry about the 60 games. I'm not so worried. When you look at where he was drafted 2 overall, but you look at the situation he got drafted into. The Warriors, at the time, they had a terrible season that year. But that's because they lost Draymond to injury, they lost Curry to injury, they lost Clay to injury. They just lost everybody, all of their key players to injury. So of course you're going to suck. But when all of those players are healthy, you look at how dangerous that team is, because you saw them the next season. They were perfectly fine.
Right.
It's just more of the situations you get drafted into, because there's certain situations where with most players it would work. Wiseman, he clearly didn't fit the Warriors and what they were trying to do, because the Warriors and what they try to do is they try to go after the players that aren't big names. They try to go after the players that nobody really knows of, and they're going to weaponize that and create something like they've done with Curry and Clay and Draymond, pretty much, and even an older Andre Iguodala. So when you add a young guy who still needs to develop some of his game and adjust to the NBA and everything, it's hard to do that on a team that is already built to win.
Right.
It's pretty hard to walk in and go, yay, I get some time to develop, and then next thing you know, next year or midway through the season, I'll be one of the best players in the league. He didn't really get that opportunity. He never really saw the floor his rookie year, just in the sense of the Warriors realized, man, maybe we do need to develop him a little bit. Maybe we do need to give him some time. And that's why he got sent to the Santa Cruz Warriors so much, is because they recognized that he still needs to develop some of his game. But the Warriors wasted that pick on him, because if he would have went to Charlotte, even without LaMelo being there, because that was the same draft, even being in Charlotte, he'd be one of the best centers in the league right now. I firmly believe that. And so I just think it was the situation for him on the Warriors because the Warriors were already built. They weren't going to wait to rebuild or develop him. They were just wanting to go and win a championship.
If, we see James Wiseman coming to Detroit, the Pistons on their roster have several young centers, Marvin Bagley, Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren. Seeing that and coming to Detroit, is James Wiseman, if you're James Wiseman, are you excited to come to Detroit?
Oh, yeah. You get competition who are all relatively young. And then not only that, but he may see this as, or at least what I would see this as if I were Wiseman, is I'm walking into a situation where I can develop my game. I can sit on the bench for a little bit. I can still get playing time. Where these three guys, they're going to get playing time already because they're key players on this team. And so it's more of like, oh, I get to take a chill pill. I get to develop my game, just slow things down. And it's going to give the Pistons a ton of time to develop him, especially this season alone, and try and see what they can piece together by the end of the season. And let's say this does pan out. You have three young centers that are studs, and then you throw in Bagley, who's really a power forward, but we'll throw him into the conversation as center. But you have four studs young centers that you could easily trade away for assets. I'm not saying Duren's getting traded. I'm not saying Stu's getting traded. The most likely getting traded out of those is Wiseman and Bagley. Bagley being a little bit higher than Wiseman. But you still, if you're able to develop Wiseman, who was the number 2 overall pick, there's a reason why he was getting taken top 2 for a reason. So if you can develop him, imagine how well you could package him in a deal to get Wemby as an example in this upcoming draft. Because Wiseman is still 21 years old, 7 foot, is a great defender, better defender than what Wemby is. Wemby is just a better overall offensive player. So a team drafting that high, maybe they don't need offense. Maybe they need defense. So that's where the Pistons could package in Wiseman and go like, here, we'll give you one of the best up and coming young players that is a great defender and some picks for Wemby. And then all of a sudden we have Wemby.
Right. If you're giving, you were talking about the ESPN article that was kind of grading today's trades, the last couple of weeks trades. What are you giving this James Wiseman trade, grade wise?
I think it's an A.
Okay.
You can't go A plus. I wish you could, but you can't. It's an A because of you pretty like take away Saddiq Bey out of this sentence for me, really, in the sense of think about what you just got for how little you gave up. Because realistically, Saddiq Bey didn't get traded for James Wiseman. It was Gary Payton getting traded for James Wiseman, essentially. The Pistons weren't really an X factor in this trade. In the sense of the Warriors were clearly willing to give him up just to get Gary Payton back from Portland. So, but you look at what we gave up to get James Wiseman, who was the 2nd overall pick. We gave up a guy who was the 19th overall pick, and we gave up Kevin Knox, who was like pick 7 or 8 and hasn't really panned out yet. So when you think of the fact that you got the number 2 overall pick, who's still only 21 years old and still has a very, very, very high ceiling compared to Saddiq Bey, who has been inconsistent this year. His numbers have been lower than they previously have been the last 2 years. He just hasn't been in the same. And then that's easy for Weaver or anybody in the Pistons community to really question that. And so I would grade this trade an A for us. The Hawks really getting Bey, that's an A for them, given that they traded away 5 second-round picks and that was it. And then the Portland Trailblazers getting Kevin Knox, I would say that's at least a B minus, and that you could say is a little high for Kevin Knox, but he's shown in the little opportunities he's gotten with us that he can still play.
Right. Yeah, he's still got, when he finds that consistency in 5 games and you give him the minutes, he can produce in 17 minutes. I really do believe that. As far as this James Wiseman trade, I'm probably rolling with, yeah, I might go with an A2 if Wiseman gets hurt within this next week and a half. I'm giving it like a C minus, but right now I'm probably giving it an A. I love Saddiq. While we were in Detroit before the game, we were watching Saddiq warm up, get his buckets in, and we were like, oh, I hope Saddiq isn't traded. And then boom, a week later it's happening. But so it is unfortunate, but I really do like James Wiseman's game. I think he's a very solid player, and I think that people were kind of saying he's a Marvin Bagley 2.0, that he's just going to happen. What's happened with Marvin Bagley and the Detroit Pistons is what's going to happen with Wiseman. I don't believe that. I think Wiseman will have a bigger impact than Marvin Bagley has had so far, but only time will tell.
Yep.
I want to give a quick shout out. We had a couple Instagram comments that we had on our most recent post saying that we were going to have a last minute emergency trade alert podcast. I'm going to give a quick shout out to Pistons_fan04. This is what he commented on our latest post. Honestly, Wiseman has potential to be an incredible in Detroit. He's looked bad in Golden State because he doesn't fit with the pace and play style, but his style will fit with Detroit. And yeah, losing Saddiq Bey sucks. But if we don't get Wemby, then having room to draft another wing will be really nice. And that's kind of the same sentiment that we had. So it's nice to see some of these Pistons fans, that are a little bit more educated, trying to I see where Weaver's coming from, because it's kind of a plan B if we don't get Wemby. And then if we do get Wemby, we just have another big on our roster that has a lot of potential that maybe we can flip later on, depending on how things go with Wemby. So it was nice to kind of see that, and see that Pistons fans are kind of coming around on this trade. It's right now on this trade, it's really like split in the middle, like most things. It's either you hate it and you can't stand it, or you're like, okay, I see where Weaver's coming from. I can take that. Any last thoughts or takeaways that you kind of want to mention before we wrap up today's trade alert?
Yeah. So Wiseman is, a lot of people wouldn't think of him in this capacity, but he's actually a great defender. He is one of the better defenders in terms of bigs and young prospects right now. And he's 7 foot, which is bigger than Duren and Stu, which we need height and size desperately, as I mentioned on the recap, pretty much saying that the Pistons were terrible last night. But yeah, I think when you add a great defender in with Jalen Duren, who is another great defender, but who has potential to be something on offense, and then you have Stu, who is more offensive than defensive, it can really balance things out. And you move Stu to the bench, have Wiseman in at the 4, and then throw Duren in at the 5. It's kind of like replicating what the Cleveland Cavaliers have done this year.
Yeah.
With Mobley and Jared Allen.
It is super reminiscent now that you say that. And a couple of years ago, like 5 years ago, there was more talk about small ball. And I think that era of the NBA kind of went away pretty quickly, and you don't see it as much anymore. And I think we've noticed with Stu at the center position, it just doesn't work the way we wanted. We've kind of turned him into a power forward. Luckily, he's been able to develop his 3-point shot. So it's been I would say a fairly smooth transition. It hasn't necessarily translated into wins, but Stu's play hasn't drastically gone down or anything. Him as an individual, his play has stayed pretty solid. Before we wrap up today's pod, I want to give a quick shout out to D._Major Music. He left a comment on today's post also. This is what he had to say. Don't mind the trade of Saddiq. I just thought we didn't get equal value in terms of production return with Wiseman. I can see where he's coming from as far as, Saddiq on any given night can give us 30. We know that. He's going to hover around 17. Maybe he'll have a game where he's under 10, but then he'll usually come back and get 19. I don't know if we're going to see that from Wiseman. That's why time will tell. And hopefully we can see a little bit more consistency out of Wiseman. Hopefully his skill is a little bit more consistent than what Saddiq's was, but time will tell.
Yeah.
Well, that will do it for today's Trade Alert podcast. Make sure to stay on a lookout for our Saturday merch drop. It is our second merch drop. You will find these style hats, and make sure to go find Grind Clothing Co. on Instagram. Follow them, and you can find all the links to our merch on that Instagram page. And you can also find the link to our merch on the description below and in our link in bio. We will see you guys in the next Revved Up recap. Peace.